Buckle up, listeners, because today we're diving into some seriously wild stories. We're talking hurricanes, corporate scandals, even a little bit of heartwarming wedding drama. And get this, it's all connected in ways you might not expect.
It never ceases to amaze me how these seemingly isolated events can expose these underlying patterns. Like
Oh,
take Hurricane Helene, for example. Talk about a stark reminder that the impact of a disaster goes way beyond just the immediate headlines.
yeah, and those headlines are hard-hitting enough as it is. I mean, over 190 lives lost, FEMA's budget is stretched thin, and now we have Hurricane Kirk brewing on the horizon.
Yeah, it's like when it rains, it pours.
It really is.
And it's easy to get fixated on that immediate aftermath, but the real cost of a disaster like this unfolds over years.
Yeah.
Like, there is this study that found thousands of excess deaths in the 15 years following major storms.
Thousands. That's more than the initial death toll, isn't it?
Yeah, thousands more.
That's heartbreaking and honestly a little surprising. I wouldn't have thought the impact would last that long.
It's a hidden crisis, really. And it's not just about delayed healthcare access after the storm, though that is a huge factor, of course. This study actually found that a significant number of those excess deaths were linked to things like heart disease and diabetes. It's like the stress, the financial strain, the disruption of routines. It all takes a toll on people's health in ways that we don't immediately see.
Wow, that's a side of natural disasters we really don't hear enough about.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the ripple effects in other areas too, right? Like, did you see that story about the IV fluid shortage?
Oh, yeah.
Apparently one of the main production plants is in North Carolina. Helene knocked it offline. Now hospitals are freaking out about rationing.
It really highlights how interconnected our world really is, doesn't it? Even if you're 1,000 miles away from a hurricane, you might still feel the impact. Could be a delayed surgery, a shortage of essential goods, even something as simple as a price hike at the grocery store.
It's scary to think about.
Yeah.
And it kind of begs the question, how prepared are our supply chains for these kinds of cascading failures? Like, what can we as individuals even do to be more prepared for situations like this?
Well, I think for one, awareness is key, right? Like understanding where our essential goods come from, recognizing the potential points of vulnerability. Beyond that, it's about supporting policies and businesses that prioritize resilience and diversification in our supply chains. It's a collective effort, really.
It's easy to get caught up in the big picture stuff.
Yeah.
But behind all the statistics from Hurricane Helene, there are some real human stories.
Yeah.
Some inspiring, some, well, downright infuriating.
That's the thing about disasters, isn't it? They really bring out the best and the worst of humanity.
It's true. And unfortunately, we're seeing some of that worst playing out right now. Did you see that story about the factory in Tennessee?
I did, yeah.
They were practically in the direct path of the hurricane,
Yeah.
and managers allegedly refused to let employees evacuate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, several people are dead.
Yeah, I read about that. Those allegations of corporate negligence are incredibly disturbing. If that's true, it represents a complete failure of leadership and a blatant disregard for human life.
It's infuriating. You would think in this day and age, with all the technology and early warning systems we have, that, something like that wouldn't happen, that worker safety would be the priority.
You would hope so, right?
Yeah.
This whole situation raises a lot of questions about worker protections during emergencies, about corporate responsibility, about the ethical obligations that companies have to their employees when disaster strikes. It's a very stark reminder that we can't solely rely on businesses to do the right thing. We need strong regulations and enforcement to ensure worker safety, especially in these kinds of extreme situations.
100%. You can't let tragedies like this just fade into the background. But on a slightly lighter note, I do have to share this other story I came across. Have you heard about David Jones?
David Jones. I don't think so. Does that name ring a bell?
So he's the father of the bride who is determined to get to his daughter's wedding, even with, Helene bearing down on him.
Sure.
The guy walked 17 miles, hitchhiked when he could, even battled through mud and debris, all to watch his daughter down the aisle.
Wow. Now that's dedication.
Right. It's like something out of a movie.
It is.
But for me, it kind of represents that glimmer of hope,
Mhm.
that resilience of the human spirit that we see time and time again in the face of adversity.
Absolutely. Amidst all the devastation and the tragedy, stories like David Jones's, they remind us of the power of love, commitment, and that unyielding human spirit that just refuses to be defeated. It's a powerful antidote to the negativity and the despair that these events can often generate.
It's kind of crazy how even with, a natural disaster happening. There's still all this other news swirling around. This whole thing with Sydney Sweeney and those paparazzi
Yeah.
really got to me, I gotta say.
Right.
It's a rough reminder that fame has a pretty hefty price tag sometimes.
Yeah, it's a complex issue, isn't it? Because on the one hand, these celebrities, they choose a public life, right?
Yeah.
And public interest just kind of comes with the territory.
Right.
But on the other hand, the lengths that some of these paparazzi go to, it really crosses the line into harassment, hiding in bushes, harassing her family.
Oh, totally.
That's not journalism.
No,
It's an invasion of privacy.
Yeah. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home, celebrity or not. It really makes you wonder about the ethics of it all. And speaking of ethics, this other story about those Uber crash victims really got under my skin. So they're being told they can't sue Uber because their daughter clicked on an arbitration clause in the Uber Eats app.
Oh, wow.
The Uber Eats app.
Yeah, that's a classic example of how something seemingly so unrelated, like, just ordering food, can actually have these huge legal ramifications that most people are totally unaware of.
I'll admit, I even had to look up what an arbitration clause even was. Like this
Yeah.
little bit of legal jargon they bury in the terms and conditions,
Right.
basically saying you're giving up your right to sue.
And you agree to settle any disputes outside of court.
And while they are illegal, you know, these clauses, they're often used by these companies to avoid those public lawsuits and, potentially limit their own liability.
Right.
And that really raises questions about transparency and fairness, especially in cases like this where, the individuals involved, they might not even realize what they even agreed to.
Exactly. It feels like we're constantly being asked to sign away our rights without even realizing it, all in the name of convenience.
Yeah.
Click here, click there, boom, you waived your right to sue.
It's a disturbing trend, and it really kind of highlights that growing power imbalance between corporations and, us everyday individuals. We see it with these arbitration clauses. We see it with invasive data collection practices. We see it with algorithms shaping our online experiences. Makes you wonder, are we sacrificing too much in the name of convenience and technology?
It's a question we should all be asking. But, okay, before we get too far down that rabbit hole, I do want to touch on a few other stories that caught my eye. First up, this whole thing with the white supremacist group being busted in California. Talk about a wild ride.
Right.
Nazi paraphernalia, death threats, even had a fake drug treatment center. It's like something straight out of a crime thriller.
It's a stark reminder that the threat of domestic terrorism is very real, unfortunately, and it often hits a lot closer to home than we'd like to believe. And what's particularly alarming about this case is the alleged connection to fentanyl trafficking.
Whoa.
They were actually using this fake treatment center as a front for their operation.
Wait, so they were mixing, like, their hateful ideology with something as deadly as fentanyl trafficking?
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
It really highlights the complex web that these extremist groups are often operating within. And, it circles back to our earlier conversations about vulnerabilities. A lot of this fentanyl, it enters the country through our legal ports. They exploit weaknesses in our existing supply chains and security measures. It's a reminder that all these issues, as unrelated as they might seem on the surface, they're often interconnected in ways that we might not initially realize.
It's true. Wow. Okay, so from hurricanes to hate groups to hidden clauses in our apps, it's a lot to process, even without a natural disaster going on.
It is.
And then to top it all off, we have this whole debate raging about election betting. Millions of dollars pouring in, concerns about manipulation, foreign influence. It feels like we're walking a tightrope here.
It kind of speaks to the broader themes we've been discussing today, don't you think? Power, accountability, the systems that we all operate within, whether it's a natural disaster like Helene exposing those vulnerabilities, or a celebrity facing these privacy violations, a family grappling with the fine print of a contract, or a nation wrestling with the complexities of election integrity. All these events, they force us to confront the challenges and the opportunities, I think, of this increasingly interconnected world that we live in.
It's a lot to unpack, that's for sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this one question. In a world that feels increasingly complex and honestly pretty uncertain, how do we navigate these, kind of choppy waters? How do we become more informed, more aware, and ultimately more empowered to not just make sense of it all, but to actually create some positive change? It's something I hope you'll all keep thinking about long after this deep dive ends.